So just to let you know, obviously there's nothing wrong with reading the news or following any stories. It's nothing personal, as we stated in the instructions here. It's just the process of getting the most impartial, fair jurors that are seeing all this for the first time we can in the case. So thank you so much for your service. As I mentioned, other jurors that have been excused, if anybody wants to talk to you, you're allowed to do that within those parameters I stated, and if somebody insists on doing that and you don't want to talk to them, then please report that to the court. And with that, thank you for your service. Let's next have Juror 536 brought in for individual voir dire. All right, juror number 536 is seated for individual voir dire. This juror does indicate some information they've learned about the state from pretrial publicity or reporting. I'll have a few questions and then allow the attorney some additional questions. Have you viewed any beyond news reporting? And counsel at State's table, if you could keep the whispering down a little bit, that's distracting. For the juror 536, if you have, please indicate, watched any individual programs about this case, such as a Dateline special or 2020 or a Netflix documentary or a movie or anything like that. Have you seen any of that?
No, I have not.
Okay. Before you were told what the charges were in this case by the court when you came in for your jury service, were you aware that the defendant had been charged anywhere with anything?
I had seen headlines that, like, I think a couple people had been charged, but I didn't really pay attention to what. Mostly it was just rumors I'd heard around because one of my friends was born in and then lived in Hawaii. And when I heard that some like kids were missing and they might be in Hawaii, like my friend was talking about it, but I didn't know any specifics of charges or anything.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the court's additional voir dire for this juror. Does the state have any questions?
I think just a few, Your Honor. First, actually, I'll turn to just the hardship portion. I did just want to...
Sorry, can I scoot my chair a little bit? There's a monitor blocking. I can't really see you. Can I scoot over a little bit?
Or if you just want to take the podium, Miss Blake.
Sorry. That one was fine. It was that one right there. Okay.
You were just fine. Sorry. I should have realized that it would be blocked. I just wanted to follow up on a few things. On the hardship portion, I think you had indicated that your job wouldn't love it, but that they would allow jury duty.
Yeah.
Is that still the case?
Yeah, I clarified with my HR, and they, weirdly enough, as long as I give them the jury fee that I get, like the daily $10, they will pay me my salary, which is the first time I've ever heard of something like that, but that's...
And you felt that's an okay exchange
yeah,
then?
That's fine. Yeah, no, it's a totally okay exchange. It was kind of weird.
All right.
Yeah,
so you were able to determine that you could make it work with your employment then?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to verify that and double check it because I had seen that note there. And then with regard to the media, it looked like you had indicated you've seen her name in the headlines, something about missing kids in Hawaii and not much else.
Yeah.
Is that still pretty accurate?
Yeah. I said, mostly headlines. I don't know a lot about it, but I'm familiar with the name.
And you'd also indicated that you had seen the kids were missing and found buried somewhere, and you had a friend that talked about it once because she was from Hawaii.
Yeah.
Did you go into a lot of detail with your friend about it? Do you recall?
No, she just said something like, oh, those kids that went missing in Yellowstone, maybe they're in Hawaii. And I'm like, oh, that's great, because kids missing in Yellowstone is scary. And then she got back to me and she's like, turns out they weren't in Hawaii. They found like buried somewhere. And that's kind of all I know.
And so just based on that information provided from your friend,
Yeah.
did you then go look anything up, try to find more information?
No, I'm not really a true crime fan. Try to avoid that if I can, but here we are.
Anything about that information that you've seen or heard that causes you concerns about whether or not you could sit on a jury in this case and set aside anything that your friend may have told you or anything that you've seen on the news or media and only consider the evidence presented during the trial?
I don't have any concerns about that.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm familiar enough with court to know that the only thing that matters in a case is what is presented in this courtroom, and I'm very good at compartmentalizing information, so.
And with your ability to compartmentalize, do you have any concerns about your ability to set aside anything you may have seen or heard and render a fair and impartial verdict in this case?
I don't have any concerns.
I don't have any further questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. Mr. Archibald, you may inquire.
So it sounds like your friend was more involved in this case than you were.
Yeah, I have a few true crime junkie friends, but that's not my scene.
And do they know that you could be on the jury?
They know that I have jury duty, but I haven't discussed any of the case with them. I've only talked about it with my employer.
Have your friends asked you about your appearance last week and then today?
No, they haven't.
If you listened to the evidence and then voted not guilty, would your friends be upset with you?
I have no idea. I don't know what their opinions on the case are, but my friends trust my judgment, so I don't think it would be a problem.
Okay. So they're not they haven't expressed such strong opinions to you about the case that you've made up your mind.
They haven't expressed any opinions to me about the case, just some information about, like, kids being found and not found.
Okay. In your state of mind, with what you know about what you've heard about the case, are you comfortable in serving as a juror?
Yes, I feel comfortable.
Your Honor, I didn't previously object to juror number 536. I didn't object last week, and I don't object today.
All right, very well. I'll just, I think, put on the record at this time then, the defense has passed this juror for cause. Does the state also pass juror 536 for cause?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, juror 536, if you'll go ahead and return with the bailiff, you'll have a few more instructions before you leave today. We will next have juror 631. All right, juror 631 has been seated again for individual voir dire. As we get started, I'll just ask a few questions for juror 631. Before the court advised you of the charges in this case, were you aware at all of what the defendant had been charged with here or anywhere else?
Partly. I haven't heard of the case recently, to be honest, until I got called for jury duty and people were saying, oh, I bet it's for that trial. And I was like, wait, what? I apologize, I didn't even recognize the name. They had to remind me. But I had heard of it originally when it came out, just bits and pieces. I honestly thought the trial was done and over with, so I was kind of surprised.
Okay.
So recently I haven't heard anything.
All right. And you weren't made aware then of any particular charges filed or anything like that?
No, I mean, from original, I had heard, children, and then I had heard a wife and something about a brother, but I didn't really pay much attention, to be honest. I tend to ignore media if I can.
Okay, so to clarify on that point then, besides anything you may have heard just in passing in the news, did you go out of your way to watch any sort of documentaries or specials, news specials, crime specials about the case?
No, I did not.
Okay, thank you for those responses. Then that will conclude the court's voir dire for this individual juror. The state, if you have any questions, you can ask at this time.
Thank you, Your Honor. And before we get into the media, I was just going to do a follow-up on the hardship. I think you'd indicated today that you don't have one, but I just want to follow up with a response in the questionnaire. And this was specifically to the sequestration. I think you indicated that you could potentially, and I will be clear, we're unsure if the court will sequester the jury at this point, but it could be a possibility, which is why I want to follow up with this. You had indicated that you could potentially arrange it, that you do have your son every other week and an old dog that needs medication twice a day.
Correct.
Is that still a concern for you if the jury were to be sequestered?
I would have to organize it. I mean, if needed, I can make it happen. I haven't inquired about anything at that, at this point yet. I do have a significant other that lives with me, and my mom does live close. So it is possible. I would prefer not to, but I can probably make it happen, is my guess.
Okay. Thank you for that. I just wanted to follow up on that since I'd noticed that response. With regard to the publicity, I think you indicated that you haven't really heard a lot about it and you haven't followed the case. Is that still accurate and correct?
It is.
You did make a comment about hearing something about a brother. Do you recall where you would have heard that comment?
It was years and years ago, and I honestly don't know if it was an individual, if it was, social media, if it was news. I honestly can't tell you anything about it. It was so long ago.
Do you follow social media quite regularly?
Not for, I do just for personal reasons to keep up on friends and family life. So I, like Facebook, I scroll along. I don't typically follow any real media pages. I do follow some just to follow up with like Boise State or, stuff like that. But I tend to shy away from stuff just because it's not typically a full story is what I found.
Do you recall if you've ever, while on social media or otherwise, seen any feed stories, anything pop up in your feed about this case or this?
Not recently, no. Nothing's popped up recently.
And so when you say not recently, have things popped up before that you've looked at?
Like I said, in the past, when the case originally appeared in, the media or whatever news, I honestly can't tell you where I saw it or heard it. I don't know if it was social media or like the actual like news. So I can't be for sure, but I know, like I said, I thought the case was actually settled and done a few years ago. So I know for a few years I haven't seen anything on it.
Okay. And do you recall specifically what you had heard about a brother or the brother?
I don't. I apologize.
No, you don't need to be sorry. That's why we're just trying to make sure that we understand completely. So I appreciate your answers. Judge, I think any other questions that we would have, we would probably ask that they be taken outside of the purview of the public.
Okay. Let me let Mr. Archibald conduct voir dire, and then we'll move on to those other topics with the audio muted if we need to go there. So, Mr. Archibald, if you've got any voir dire for this juror at this time on those issues, and if you have any further voir dire on any other subjects, we'll take that up without the audio running.
Do you remember the source of the news? Was it a special? Was it KTVB?
I don't recall. My guess is it was probably just the regular, like KTVB news or, Channel 12 or 2 or whatever happened to be on. I don't typically follow a whole lot. I've just found, especially over the last few years, they just are pretty one-sided on everything. And I like to hear the whole story. I like to hear good and bad stuff, not just what the media wants me to hear.
Okay. I don't have any other questions about the pretrial publicity.
Okay. At this point then, what we'll need to do is mute the audio to the simulcast because we're going to discuss other topics that shouldn't be heard by the public for this particular juror. So once that's been done, please confirm with the court, and then we'll continue the voir dire on that subject.
It's muted, Judge.
Okay. Okay. Court's advised the audio's back on the simulcast. On Juror 631, then, the additional questioning on those sensitive matters was taken up. At this time, does the state pass this juror for cause?
Yes, Your Honor.
Does the defense pass this juror for cause?
Yeah. Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you, Counsel. Juror 631, we'll have you return to the jury room. Continue with our other individual voir dire of other jurors, and you'll have additional instructions when we finish. Thank you. Juror 646 will be next. Okay, welcome back. Juror 646 is reseated at this time for individual voir dire. The court's reviewed your questionnaire. You have some information about this case through media or news reporting. I think you also had some concern regarding hardship that was already discussed but could be discussed again here. Starting with the media exposure you may have had to the case, Juror 646, I'll ask you first, are you, prior to coming in and the court advising you of the charges in this case, did you know anything about what the defendant had been charged with here or anywhere else?
Yes.
What did you know about that specifically?
Basically the charges that you described.
Okay. Any other information you had through the news about her being charged with anything anywhere?
No.
Okay. In terms of what you've seen in the news or the media, is that through normal news broadcasts or reporting on the internet? How did you see that?
Yeah, local, I guess local and national media headlines. Usually when I log on to pull up a new web page, there'd be news articles, and I scroll through the headlines and see stuff.
Okay. Have you watched any sort of documentaries or made-for-TV movies or specials, news crime specials about this case?
No.
Okay, that concludes the court's individual voir dire for this juror. The state can inquire as to Juror 646.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I did want to just start with the hardship. I just want to ask a couple questions there. You indicated that you can sit on the jury today without a hardship. Is that correct?
Correct.
I noted on your questionnaire you had marked that your full-time job could potentially be a hardship, but that you would likely be able to maintain employment. Have you been able to figure that out? Excuse me.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, with the hours planned to be in the courtroom, I should be able to maintain my work responsibilities after being released from the court for the day.
With the suggested court schedule, that would work for you?
Yeah. As mentioned by the other juror, being sequestered could be a challenge, but even there, I think I could work around it.
Okay. And I think the court had indicated that there is a chance that there would be some sequestration in this trial. That hasn't been decided yet, so you believe that you would be able to work around that?
If not for an 8-week period, if I think that was possible up to a couple of weeks.
And you'd be able to do that and be able to set aside any concerns with work and focus on the evidence presented in the case?
Correct.
Thank you. You just indicated that, so I just wanted to make sure that I clarified that with you now. With regard to the media exposure, I think you had indicated on the questionnaire you've seen a little bit in the news and some headlines, that you know very little. You know that she's accused of involvement in the murder of her children. Is that still accurate with what you know of this case?
Yes.
Anything additional that you've learned since being called for jury duty?
No.
Does anything about what you have heard or seen cause you concerns with your ability to set any of that aside and only listen to the evidence presented in a trial in this matter and give it the weight you think it's due?
No concerns.
Any concerns about your ability to sit on this jury and render a fair and impartial verdict based on anything you've heard or seen before?
No.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. Mr. Archibald.
So on the source of the news, you mentioned local and national. Local, would that be like KTVB?
Yes, correct.
And then national would be what?
Like Fox or CNN.
And some of those stations have presented specials, Dateline or 2020 or 48 Hours. Have you ever watched any of that?
No.
Did you watch any YouTube series about this case?
No.
Any Netflix?
No.
There's also been books and movies about this case so far. Did you watch any or read any of that?
No.
So you and only you would know your exposure to. Has any of that caused you to think that my client is guilty, even though you haven't heard any evidence?
No.
So do you have any problem with still presuming my client innocent?
No.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Archibald. Let me inquire at this time then, does the state pass Juror 646 for cause?
Yes, Your Honor.
Does the defense pass this juror for cause?
Yes.
Okay, Juror 646, you'll be returning to the jury room here, and then we'll have some final instructions before you're excused for the day. Thank you. We'll next have Juror 818 brought. Actually, yeah, 818. All right, Juror 818 has been reseated for individual voir dire in this case. The court's reviewed your questionnaire It indicates that you have some exposure to this case through pretrial reporting or publicity, and we wanted to be able to question you about that outside the presence of your fellow jurors. So I'll have a few questions for you to get started, and then I'll let the attorneys ask additional questions. On my questions, let me first ask, before you were brought in for this case as a juror, were you made aware, or did you have any knowledge of what charges or any charges that had been filed against the defendant here or anywhere else?
No.
Okay. Did you have anything else to add on that?
No, just some of the basic news. It all becomes white noise, a lot of it.
All right. In terms of your media exposure, how is it that you had learned about this case, if you could specify?
Watching the nightly news.
All right. Have you ever watched any special about the case, such as a Dateline or a 2020 or a documentary or a made-for-TV movie or anything like that?
No.
All right. That concludes the court's questioning for this juror. The state can inquire on individual voir dire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just going over the publicity part, I believe you'd indicated on your questionnaire you had seen some news on TV about when she was arrested and that she and her husband and her brother possibly killed her kids, and then that you had seen on TV, or on the TV, they'd said that they were killed by Chad Daybell, Lori Vallow, and Alex Cox, referring to the question on who Tammy, Tylee, and JJ were. Did you hear or see all of that on the local news?
Yes.
Have you watched any national news programs or seen anything from another media source?
No.
Do you watch the local news nightly?
I did prior to last week. And then as soon as I'll catch the weather just to know if it's going to snow the next day or something. But I've been reading just books, novels, and listening to a lot of just Pandora music.
In place of when you would normally watch the news?
Correct.
Up until last week, had you seen all the local coverage of this case then?
No, I just I have the news on, but I'm usually cooking dinner at that time, and just it's kind of in the background.
Okay, just one moment. With what you've seen in the news that we just talked about, do you have any concerns with your ability to be able to set that aside and only listen to the evidence presented in this case and only consider that evidence in rendering a verdict?
I have no concerns that I will listen to only what's presented in this room.
Any concerns about your ability to render a fair and impartial verdict based on anything you've seen or heard before outside of what will be presented at the trial?
No concerns.
I don't have any additional questions, Your Honor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Archibald, you can conduct individual voir dire if you'd like.
When you filled out your questionnaire, you wrote down the name Alex Cox.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you learn that name?
They had mentioned on the news, running through the names, that it was her brother.
And so that name, you were able to remember that name. I'm guessing you've heard that name more than once or twice.
No, seeing the list of, are we related to any of these, that 200 names or so in our questionnaire?
Oh, uh-huh.
That name, the Cox name was there because prior to that I didn't remember the name.
Okay. And then when you saw the names on the, do you believe Alex Cox is a potential witness in this case?
No.
And why is that?
I don't think he's still alive.
Okay. And where did you learn that?
I had thought on the news, I heard something about he was deceased.
Okay.
But I don't know any circumstances around that.
Okay. Do Do you remember how he died?
No,
Do you remember where he died?
no.
Do you agree that it's sometimes hard to unsee details about a case?
I agree. It is hard to unsee things in our lives.
Right. And no offense to you, ma'am, but because of that exposure, Your Honor, I'm going to challenge Juror 818 for implied bias.
All right, what's the state's response?
Your Honor, the state will not object to the defense's motion.
All right, the court's considered the request that Juror 818 be excused for cause on the basis of implied bias. I do find that, while not substantial, there is some concerning detail to what has been recalled about the case, which could rise to a concern and implied bias, so the court will rule and grant the challenge to excuse Juror 818 for cause. So thank you so much for filling out your questionnaire and coming in today as well. As I mentioned to other jurors when you leave, please be respectful of your other jurors. If you want to talk to anyone about this case, and if anyone persists in talking to you and you don't want to talk to them, please report that to the court. With that, you have our sincere thanks, and you can be excused. Next juror we'll have brought in is Juror 849. All right, Juror 849 is returned for additional individual voir dire in this case. This juror has indicated some exposure to details of the case through pretrial publicity or news, and we'll ask you some follow-up questions on that at this time. So the first question I would have for you is whether or not you were aware of what this defendant was charged with before you came here for your jury service.
The extent of the 7 charges that you've read, no. The potential for a murder trial, yes.
Okay, and with what you had heard, was that, did you know anything else about what the defendant was charged with here or anywhere else in terms of any details?
Say that again, please.
Did you have any details about what the defendant had been charged with here or anywhere else?
No, not detail level wise.
Okay. Have you watched any programs that focused on this case, such as Dateline, 2020, any made-for-TV movies, any documentaries on paid prescription services, or any other media like that?
I have not.
Okay, that concludes my questioning for Juror 849, and as I recall, I think we already went through the hardship issue on this case with the challenge for cause, which was overruled, so let's limit our voir dire to the media exposure. Starting with the state then, Ms. Blake, do you have voir dire questions for this juror?
Thank you, Your Honor. Excuse me, just briefly. Juror 849, I think you'd indicated that you have seen some general news coverage of this case, specifically that there were missing children.
That's correct.
You'd also indicated that they were later found dead on property in Idaho, that the defendant, Lori, is a suspect in the death of family members and charged with murder or accomplice to murder.
That's my understanding, yes.
And I believe you'd also indicated just general evening or morning news is where you would have potentially seen any of the information that you gathered outside of what the court told you.
That is correct.
Is all of that still accurate and correct?
Yes.
With that information, is there anything about what you have heard or seen that causes you concerns about your ability to sit on a trial in this matter and only consider the evidence presented in court and ignore what you may have seen on the news or other media sources?
There is not.
Is there anything about what you had heard or seen before on the news that causes you concerns with your ability to sit on this jury and render a fair and impartial verdict?
No, there is not.
I have no further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Blake. From the defense, Mr. Archibald.
On the news that you watch, is that the local news?
Yes, that's local news.
Like KTVB?
I think that's one of the channels. My wife has two. She flips back and forth. My goal is typically to watch weather, but there's other things that will come on. She watches it regularly, and I catch things here and there as they go on, and that's where I've seen these type of things that I mentioned in the questionnaire.
Okay. And so you're the only one who knows your state of mind about my client and what you've heard about her. Are you comfortable sitting as a juror in this case?
Yes.
And I've already tried to get you out for hardship, but they turned me down.
I kind of did too, but yes.
And so I don't have any other questions, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Archibald. So let me ask then, does the state pass Juror 849 for cause?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Noting your previously lodged objection as to hardship, which is preserved, Mr. Archibald, in terms of the media issue, does the defense pass the juror on that issue?
Yes.
Okay. Juror 849 then. We'll give you some additional instructions before you leave today. Thank you for coming back for further questioning, and we will call up next Juror 863. All right, Juror 863 is reseated for individual for Dyer. In this questionnaire, this juror indicated some knowledge of the case through pretrial news reporting or publicity, and we wanted to ask you a few additional questions about that. So the first question I'll ask you is, prior to being told about the charges in this case by me when you were brought back, did you know that the defendant had been charged with anything, anywhere, including here?
No, I just knew it was like accused.
Okay. In dealing with what you would already know about the case, have you watched any sort of programs that focused on this case, like a documentary or a 2020 news program, a Dateline, or looked some up on YouTube or anything like that?
No.
Okay, that concludes my individual voir dire for Juror 863. Does the state have questions?
Just briefly, Your Honor. I think you had indicated in your questionnaire that your knowledge was that She is accused of killing her kids. You don't know Tamara, but you heard her kids were missing, referring to who JJ and Tylee were.
Yes.
And I believe you also indicated that you may have seen or heard that on KTVB or another news station.
Yeah.
Do you recall for sure where you heard that?
I don't recall. I don't even remember when I actually saw it, but I do remember like reading the headline.
And then I did want to shift gears just a little bit here. On the hardship, you had responded that you work overnights.
Yes.
Do you work every night?
Yes. I for sure work Sunday through Thursday, and sometimes I pick up Friday and Saturday.
And when you talk about an overnight shift, what hours does that shift run?
I work 11 to 7.
Does that cause you concern with your ability to then report here to sit on a jury?
No. My job, I basically get paid to sleep because the company I work for, it's like I watch over participants, with like mental disabilities and stuff. And so my job is just to make sure they're safe overnight, but I can sleep on my shift.
When you can sleep overnight, do you, because of your duties and watching other people, does your sleep often get interrupted?
No.
The state doesn't have any additional questions. Thank you, Your Honor. And thank you, Juror 863.
All right. Mr. Archibald, do you have any questions for Juror 863?
The news that you watched about the case, where was that from?
It was a news source. I'm not sure which one it was, but
Was it something that popped up on your phone?
yeah.
And was it like KTVB or was it Fox News or?
I can't remember if it was KTVB or KBOI2, possibly. Those are the two news sources that I look at if I'm looking at news.
And so have you downloaded that news station's app or is this on Facebook or?
No, I just like to look at the news sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so when you were summoned for this jury, did you know which case this was about?
Only when I walked in here, yes.
Okay. Are you concerned about your ability to be fair and impartial to my client based upon the news that you've seen?
No.
You're confident that you can give her a fair shake?
Yes.
Do you watch YouTube specials about this case?
No.
Are you a subscriber to Netflix?
I have Netflix, yes.
Did you see the Netflix special about this case?
No. I don't believe I did.
What's that?
I don't believe I did.
Okay. You'd remember if you did.
Okay, then no.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Archibald. As to Juror 863, does the state pass this juror for cause?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. And Mr. Archibald, I don't know if the defense initially raised any challenge during the questionnaire, and if so, that would be preserved. But notwithstanding that, with the individual voir dire, then does the defense pass Juror 863 for cause at this time?
Yes.
Okay, Juror 863. We've got one other individual juror to talk to, and then we'll bring you back here in just a moment.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
If we are not sequestered, is it a possibility for me to still be able to go to work?
I will discuss that with you. If you're
Okay.
selected to be on the jury, we'll still be going through some peremptory challenges, but it would be something we'd be concerned about, but I would be able to clarify that with you before the trial started.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, Juror 869 has been seated again for individual voir dire. This juror indicated some knowledge of the case through previous news reporting or publicity, so we'll question you outside of the presence of your fellow jurors on those subjects now. The question I will have to start off is, before you came in and I read the charges last week and again today, were you aware at all of what the defendant in this case had been charged with, either here or anywhere else?
I had seen a number of news reports, and I knew she had charges against her. I did not know the specific charges.
Okay, and can you tell me a little more about what you knew, everything you can remember about charges against her?
I remember seeing, I typically watch the 5 o'clock news in the afternoons. I remember hearing that there was some children missing at some point. I remember seeing footage of Mrs. Daybell in Hawaii, and I remember hearing eventually, a few months later, that the children were found. That's all I really knew.
Okay. Before you came here, have you watched any programs that focused on this case, like a Dateline or a documentary, anything on YouTube?
No.
Any programs that focused on this case as the subject?
No, Your Honor.
All right, I'll let the state conduct any additional voir dire at that time. That concludes my questions.
Thank you, Your Honor. Juror 869, I think on your questionnaire, you had indicated that you believed or knew Tamara was married to Chad Daybell, that Tylee and JJ were Lori's children, and that you'd learned that information from the news.
Yes, correct.
Do you recall what news source or where you would have learned that information?
I typically watch KTVB, the 5 o'clock news, so I'm assuming that's where I learned that.
And have you seen every news program that KTVB may have run or news segment regarding this case?
Oh, no.
You don't always watch the full segment of the news or the full news show?
I don't. I'm actually not a very big news junkie. I tend to watch like Food Network and HGTV.
Okay. So, and you don't recall seeing any stories about this on those networks?
I know I saw brief snippets on KTVB, but not the whole story.
And then I just want to talk about a couple other things that were on the questionnaire. You had written down that in the beginning you felt like she may have played a part in her children's death, but you would need evidence to be certain. And you'd also indicated that you feel like she may be involved, but you need evidence and proof to be certain.
That's correct.
Do you still feel that way today?
Yes, and I'll explain myself by saying I know or I believe that many murders are committed by people that know the other person. So, I mean, my feeling is she probably had some involvement, but I don't know for sure.
And so I want to break that down with you a little bit and
Okay.
kind of in two parts. Are you basing that off of just the relationship between Miss Vallow Daybell and the victims, or are you basing that on things that you've seen on the news or media?
Oh, just based on her being their mother.
So I'm going to ask two separate questions then regarding those things. Based on what you've seen on the news or the news reports you've read or heard, does anything about that cause you concern with your ability to sit as a juror in this case and only listen to the evidence presented?
I can only listen to the evidence presented.
Do you feel that you could set aside anything that you had heard before and render a fair and impartial verdict?
Yes.
And so then I want to come back to the feeling you have or the belief you have based on their relationship. Is that so ingrained in you that you could not set it aside and listen to only the evidence presented and render a fair and impartial verdict?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I am 100% willing to listen to the evidence that's only presented in this courtroom.
I don't have any additional questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. White. Mr. Archibald.
And so this news that you watched included footage in Hawaii.
Yes, I vaguely recall seeing footage of Mrs. Daybell, and I'm assuming it was Chad. I don't know for sure. And I just vaguely recall seeing footage of them walking by and the news mentioning Hawaii.
And was that the time that the reporter was shouting down, Lori, where are your kids?
Oh, that part I don't recall. I'm sorry.
So what part of the Hawaii footage?
I really only can recall seeing them walking. I don't remember anything that was said.
So like the reporter following them into a church house?
Oh, no, I only remember seeing like a walkway, the sun was out, some palm trees, and it was sort of like in my periphery. I was probably doing something else. I don't recall what was said. I'm sorry.
And you saw this local news
Yes.
enough to form an opinion that you believe that she was involved.
I would say that I formed the opinion only because she's their mother, and I was questioning, well, wouldn't a mother know where her children were?
Your Honor, I appreciate your honesty, Juror 869, and because of your exposure to the media, I'm going to ask that she be challenged for implied bias.
All right. Before I get a response to the state, I'll get the response from the state on that, Ms. Blake.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state would be objecting to that. We do believe that this juror has been very candid with her answers, and I think with regard to the information obtained, so we would be objecting to that.
All right. The state's reviewed the challenge here as to Juror 869, and looking again at the questionnaire, there's one particular response that I find troubling. And as to this juror, there's nothing wrong with watching the news, following the news, knowing what you know about the case. I want to make that perfectly clear. Certainly people are entitled to get informed on any current events they want to follow. There was a response given on page 11 of the questionnaire. Quote, I know she is charged with murdering or conspiring to murder her children and ex-husband. And so based on that particular knowledge, the court does find that there is a potential for bias through that pretrial exposure to media in the case, and details that this juror should not have going into the case as a trial juror. So based on that, the challenge is sustained, and Juror 869, you are excused with the sincere thanks of this court for coming today and for taking the time to fill out your questionnaire. As I've mentioned to other jurors, if you'd like to discuss the case, please be respectful of the other jurors in the case and only talk about your own personal experience. And if somebody insists on talking to you and you don't want to, please report that to the court.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. That will conclude the first group then. All right. Look at the others in here. Whoops, I think that was one, two. Okay, if we could have the remaining jurors, I think there's 4, maybe 3. Let me confirm who's coming back. All rise. Thank you. Please be seated. All right, we've gone on the record on those individual voir dire questioning and challenges for the jurors. We have the remaining group here who will be passed for peremptory challenges. If each of you that's still remains seated, please hold up your red card, and I'll ask the parties if they will confirm that's the group that will be moving on to peremptory challenges. So we've got juror 536, 631, 646, 849, and 863. Does the state agree that this group was passed for cause by the state?
Yes, Your Honor.
Does the defense agree pending any prior lodged objections as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've now been passed for cause, so we'll instruct you that you'll be contacted by the jury commissioner. We'll give you a card with his business contact information, and he will be giving you further instructions regarding when you'll return to come back another time for the peremptory challenges. I think that will probably be later this week, but the jury commissioner will confirm that. While you're waiting between now and then, if you should be approached, questioned, followed, or in any way bothered, please report that immediately to the court upon your return. You'll also be asked to again fill out that admonishment and acknowledgement that you have not gone and investigated or looked up the case or gone out of your way to now learn about the case at this stage, and we'll be confirming that with you, so please follow that instruction that you've previously been admonished on multiple times. With that then, that will conclude this first group, and we will see you back here once you are advised of when you'll return. We'll take a recess, and before we break, good morning. We'll go on the record on case CR 22-21-1624, State versus Lori Vallow. This is the second day of jury voir dire. The court will note that the defense is present, Mr. Archibald and Mr. Thomas, along with their client. The defendant, the state, is here as well, Mr. Wood, Ms. Blake, and Ms. Smith representing the prosecution. Is the state ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, is the defense ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, at this time we will instruct the bailiffs, if they would, to bring in our next group of jurors for individual and group voir dire. As they're being brought in, I'll just note the juror numbers in the group that I see, so we're all on the same page, should be jurors number 401 through 891. Okay. These are some of the jurors this morning getting in, so we're just waiting for them to be lined up, so we'll just wait until they're here. Do we have the list of the jurors for this one? Or will you probably get those? I think probably sign this one. Okay.
All right, please. Pens all assembled, Your Honor.
Thank you. Please be seated. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, thank you for returning to court this morning. You have been recalled as prospective jurors in the case now before us. The court will note on the record as we commence, we are on case CR 22-21-1624, State versus Lori Vallow. Parties are present as well as counsel who will be introduced additionally in a moment. I'll introduce my court staff here again for you. My name's Judge Stephen W. Boyce, and I'm the District Judge for Fremont County, Idaho, and I'm in charge of the courtroom and this trial. The court clerk assisting me is Shannon Holstein, who will be keeping minutes of these proceedings, marking any exhibits, and will administer oaths to you as jurors. The bailiffs are assisting us this morning as well, Deputies Ravello, Holmes, and Beish, and are assisting in maintaining courtroom order and working with the jury. The court reporter is Patty Bath, who is taking a stenographic record of what's being said in these proceedings. And my staff attorney is Courtney Stallings, who's seated over by the window at the table, and she'll be assisting me on legal issues that arise in this case from time to time. Each of you is qualified to serve as a juror of this court, and each of you filled out a questionnaire that was provided to you last week, and that's now been reviewed by the court and counsel, and you've been determined to be recalled for further questioning. So the first thing we'll do for the trial is to select 18 jurors, which will be 12 jurors and 6 alternates from among you. At this time, I will request that the clerk conduct a roll call of the jurors. So when your number is called, I'll also indicate to only refer to jurors by their numbers. I'll have each of you just raise your red card number and say here once that's called. So Madam Clerk, would you please take a roll call at this time?
Juror 401. Juror 536. Juror 549. Juror 615. Juror 631.
Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and let me hand the seating map to the bailiff and make sure we're seated in order. Okay. Sure. We'll get you reseated so you match the diagram that court and counsel has. So a few of you will need to move around.
It makes sense in a second. 401, 6, 25, and down one. Right there. And sir, you're going to go to that seat on the end, just go around the front. Now they're all seated here.
Okay. All right, thank you for that, Mr. Bailiff. That'll ensure that we know who we're talking to throughout the proceedings with the chart that we've all been provided. At this time, then, why don't we just start over with the reseating, and I'll have Madam Clerk please take a roll call of the jurors.
Juror 401. Juror 536. Juror 549. Juror 615. Juror 631. Juror 646. Juror 667. Juror 676. Juror 682. Juror 818.
Did we have a 696?
Sorry. Juror
Okay.
696. Juror 818. Juror 849. Juror 863. Juror 869. Juror 891.
Okay, thank you. As we get started, then the court will indicate that this matter is being simulcast to remote viewing locations here in both Ada County and a location in Madison County, Idaho. Those viewing locations are subject to a court conduct order, and in that order, the use of any electronic device to record or photograph or transmit any sounds or images from those viewing locations is strictly prohibited. The court has given the authority of the bailiffs monitoring those locations to confiscate any devices if anyone runs afoul of the terms of that conduct order, which is posted at those locations. I'll next discuss the introduction of the case and the parties at this time. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury group we have here today, to assist you in understanding and participating in the jury selection process, I'll reintroduce you to the parties and their lawyers, and then I'll briefly summarize what this case is about. When I introduce an individual, please stand and briefly face the jury panel and then retake your seats. This case has been brought by the state of Idaho. I'll sometimes refer to the state as the prosecution. The state is represented at this trial by Lindsay Blake, the prosecuting attorney for Fremont County, by Rob Wood, prosecuting attorney for Madison County, and by Rachel Smith, specially appointed prosecutor for this case. The defense is represented by Mr. Archibald and Mr. Thomas, and the defendant, Lori Vallow Daybell, is here present as well. Thank you, counsel. This case is a criminal matter, which means that the defendant is charged by the state of Idaho with a violation of the law. When you were here last week to complete your questionnaires, I read a summary of the charges as contained in the indictment. I'll give a more shortened version of that summary at this time in regards to the charges. So the state of Idaho alleges that Lori Vallow Daybell committed the crimes of count 1, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and grand theft by deception, count 2, first-degree murder, count 3, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and grand theft by deception, count 4, first-degree murder, count 5, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, count 7, grand theft. The defendant has pled not guilty to all of the charges. Please remember, this is simply a description of charges. It is not evidence. Under our law and system of justice, every defendant is presumed to be innocent. This means two things. First, the state has the burden of proving the defendant guilty. The state has that burden throughout the trial. The defendant is never required to prove her innocence, nor does the defendant ever have to produce any evidence at all. Second, the state must prove the alleged crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. A reasonable doubt is not a mere possible or imaginary doubt. It is a doubt based on reason and common sense. It may arise from a careful and impartial consideration of all the evidence or from lack of evidence. If after considering all the evidence you have a reasonable doubt about the defendant's guilt, you must find the defendant not guilty. At this time, I'll discuss the juror's duty. The duty of the jury is to determine the facts and then apply the law as set forth in the instructions I'll later give you to those facts. In this way, you will decide the case. In applying the court's instructions as to the controlling law, you must follow those instructions regardless of your opinion of what the law is or what the law should be or what any lawyer may state the law to be. During the course of this trial, including this jury selection process, you are instructed that you are not to discuss the case among yourselves or with anyone else, including any use of email, text messaging, tweeting, blogging, electronic bulletin boards, or any other form of communication, electronic or otherwise. Do not conduct any personal investigation or look up any information from any source, including the internet. Do not form an opinion as to the merits of the case until after the case has been submitted to you for your determination. On that point as well, the court will note on the record, I received the signed juror affirmation notices this morning indicating that all jurors have complied with that admonishment given to them last week when they left with after completing questionnaires. At this time then, I will ask the clerk to administer the oath to the jury panel. So ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if you would please stand and raise your right hand, I'll have you placed under oath.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will truthfully answer such questions as may be asked of you by the court or counsel, touching upon your qualifications to sit as a trial juror in the cause now on trial, so help you God?
All right, thank you. You can be seated. At this time then, the clerk has impaneled 15 prospective jurors for questioning from the small group today. Will the state stipulate that the jurors are properly seated and called and impaneled this morning?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Will the defense stipulate to that as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, counsel. In this part of the jury selection, you'll be asked questions touching on your qualifications to serve as jurors in this particular case. This part of the case is known as the voir dire examination. Voir dire is an ancient Anglo-Norman term dating back hundreds of years to the origins of common law. In Old French, it simply means to speak the truth. Voir dire examination is for the purpose of determining if your decision in this case would in any way be influenced by opinions which you now hold or by some personal experience or special knowledge which you may have concerning the subject matter to be tried. The object is to obtain 12 persons who will impartially try the issues of this case upon the evidence presented in this courtroom without being influenced by other factors. Please understand that this questioning is not for the purpose of prying into your personal affairs, but only for the purpose of obtaining an impartial jury. Whenever you need to answer a question, you can either raise your hand or when you're called upon to speak, please just raise that red card number. That's how it's most easy for us to identify who's talking and keep that clear on the record. I'll note that with the simulcast into the other viewing locations, the cameras are not showing you as jurors, so there is no video of you. You're only referred to by your juror numbers so that you can be so that can be kept confidential in the matter, and your personal identities are not revealed through that simulcast. Because the proceedings are being stenographically recorded by a court reporter, when you're communicating with the attorneys or with me, it's necessary for you to speak clearly, and when you answer the questions, please use audible responses such as yes or no instead of shaking your head or nodding or saying things like or because then we don't know what was said when we go back and read the record. Also, if you would avoid talking at the same time as anyone asking you a question, that will help our court reporter keep a clear record as well. If you do have anything that you feel should be discussed privately because it would be embarrassing or too revealing about you, something personal, we can do that without, we have capability of talking to you individually, one-on-one, and also not broadcasting that portion of the proceedings if there's a topic that requires that. So please keep that in mind as you're being questioned today. Also, there will be questioning for a lot of you as it relates to your pretrial knowledge of this case. Many of you have previously been exposed to some information about this case through pretrial publicity, and we'll be talking to you each individually about those issues. I would ask that during the course of the questioning, when you're all together, please avoid discussing any particular facts or knowledge about this case, so those jurors who have not heard anything about the case don't hear that information from you for the first time here today. I'll also instruct the attorneys if they'd please avoid repeating any questions that have already been asked by the court in its voir dire, but the attorneys do have the right to direct follow-up questions to jurors regarding the jurors' responses to any questions that would make that appropriate. The jury should be aware that during and following the voir dire examination, one or you may be challenged. Each side has challenges. Some are called for cause, by which I mean that a juror can be asked to be excused for some specific reason. In addition, each side has a certain number of what are called peremptory challenges, by which I mean each side can challenge a juror and ask that he or she be excused without giving any reason for that dismissal. If you're excused by either side, please don't feel offended or feel that your honesty or integrity has been questioned, because it has not. The court will now commence with its voir dire examination of the jury panel, after which the attorneys for both parties will be given an opportunity to make their own inquiries. All right, I'll start off with the questionnaires that you completed next week. Each of you has completed, and we've received the responses that are contained in your jury questionnaires. I'll ask you as a group then, are the answers given by each of you on the juror information form still true and accurate? Okay, all the jurors indicated yes. Let's next talk about the time commitment required if you were to serve on this case. If you are required to serve as a juror in this particular case, it would be for a period of approximately 8 weeks, and the question is, would that create a serious hardship upon you or your family or your business or profession or occupation, so as to prevent you from rendering service as a fair and impartial juror in this case? So if there's anyone that has a response to that question, if you'd please hold up your red card. All right, on the front row, jurors 667, 615, and 549 have raised their cards. On the back row, 969, 682, and 676 have also raised their cards. So we will take those questions up for each of you individually, and if you'll give me a moment, I'll start reviewing your responses in your questionnaire. So starting with juror number 549. And 696. Okay, we also have juror 696. All right, juror 549, the court reviewed the detail of your questionnaire and didn't see any mention that it would be a difficult obligation for the time frame. Would you explain what you believe the hardship would be if you were required to serve?
Just being self-employed, being able to make ends meet financially for my family. We're a family of 5.
All right, and you're currently employed, correct?
Yes.
And in your family, do you have a spouse or significant other that also works as well?
No.
All right, so are you the sole primary provider for finances for the household?
I am, yeah.
Have you discussed with your employer the possibility that you may be required to serve in this case?
I have, yeah.
And do you know what their policy is regarding any compensation you may be able to receive while you're serving on a jury?
I'm part-time with my employer. I'm full-time self-employed. So I teach music lessons, and so I talk to my clients and let them know that this came up, but I don't receive compensation for hours not worked. But with my part-time employer, they do have jury duty option, but it's unpaid time off, any number of hours.
Unpaid time off?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask the state if the state has any follow-up questions for juror 549.
We do not, Your Honor, and we would not object based on the representations made by him today of him being excused.
All right. What's the response from the defense as to juror 549?
We do not have any objection to juror 549 being excused for hardship.
All right. Thank you, counsel. The court's considered the responses provided today as well as the position of both the state and the defense as to a request to be excused for an undue hardship, finding that financially it would create an undue hardship for this particular juror given the length of the trial. The court will grant the request to be excused. So juror 549, you can be excused from your jury service. I'll indicate something to you now, and if any other jurors are excused, I'll give a more abbreviated definition here. But so juror 549, thank you for coming and filling out your questionnaire last week, coming again today. The court appreciates your time and service. If you decide to discuss this case with anyone, please be careful to respect the privacy and feelings of your fellow jurors. Please limit your comments to your own perceptions and feelings. And if anyone persists in discussing this case with you over your objections or becomes critical of your service, please report that to the court, and the court will take that up with whoever has engaged in that behavior. So that will conclude my remarks to you today, and you can be excused. All right, let's next discuss the issue with juror number 615. If you'd raise your card, please. All right.
Basically, I'm the primary provider for a special needs child, my daughter. During the day, she does attend school. During the evenings, though, is when I take care of her. I do have assistance with that, but depending on the length of the trial, or if we were sequestered, then that would cause a little bit hard hardship with her. She has a primary person that she responds best to and works best with, and that is me. So if we're sequestered, that would make things pretty difficult for her and for myself.
Okay, so during the course of the trial, if it was not during a time sequestered and we were ending around 3:30 each day, how would that comply with the schedule you've got with her?
That would comply. She gets home around that time, and then I'd be able to take care of her in the evenings.
All right, so the question would be whether or not there was a time when the jury was potentially sequestered in the case?
Yes.
Okay, and I will note that's not determined at this point, but it is a possibility, so your concern is well taken. I'll go ahead and pass this to the state if they have any additional questions regarding your request.
Judge, we don't have any questions for this juror.
All right, from the defense?
Your Honor, we don't object to Juror 615 being excused for hardship.
All right, the court's considering that as well. Does the state, didn't have any questioning, but do you have any objection to the hardship excuse request?
Judge, we do not have an objection.
All right, Juror 615, then the court has considered your responses here today, given that there's a possibility of sequestration, and we wouldn't know that until the case was fully submitted. It would potentially create an unnecessary hardship for you and your family to require you to serve in this particular case. So again, thank you for your service today, and that same admonishment I gave about discussing the case, or if anyone wants to discuss the case with you, applies. So with that, you can be excused, and thank you. Let's next talk to Juror 667.
Yes, this is the first time I've ever been in a jury or anything like that. I've never been in a courtroom for it. So you were saying that it could go on for 8 weeks. I'm not sure if it's Monday through Friday each week. Right now I've got 80 hours of jury paid, or jury duty paid hours, and then anything over that, I've got 2 weeks paid vacation that I can use, and anything over that, it's unpaid.
All right, so to clarify, the 8 weeks would typically be the full Monday through Friday each day, 8:30 to 3:30, and that's information you received from your employer after advising them you may be called to serve in this case?
Right. Yes.
Okay. I'll ask the state if they have any follow-up voir dire for Juror 667.
Judge, the state will not have an objection to this juror being released based on his representations here today. There were some other things the state was going to inquire further on, but I think this would be a reason to have him released as well.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. Mr. Archibald for the defense.
We do not object to Juror 667 being excused for hardship.
All right, the court's considered the request, and Juror 667 will be allowed to be excused based on a hardship through the representations made about what would occur through loss of income if this trial went as long as expected. So Juror 667, you're excused, and the same information I gave the other jurors about talking about the case, or if anyone talks to you, would apply. So with that, you can be excused with the thanks of the court for reporting today. Juror number 676.
I was originally unemployed when I filled out the questionnaire. I started on Friday. I am the main earner of the family. My wife does have a small part-time job, but because I've just started, I'd have no eligibility for jury pay or anything like that. It doesn't kick in for 30 days at my new company.
All right. The court, Juror 676, reviewed your responses in your questionnaire, and you did indicate that you had been searching for a job, so that would be some updated information that's occurred just since last week. Would you just advise the court and the parties of where you're currently employed?
The name of the company?
Yes.
EE Tech Media.
And when did you begin that employment?
Friday.
All right. Any questions for Juror 676 from the state?
No, Your Honor. The state would have no objection based on the new information for this juror being released.
All right. Any response from the defense?
We do not object to Juror 676 being excused for hardship.
Very well. The court's reviewed the information in the questionnaire, which did confirm this particular juror was seeking employment at the time the questionnaire was filled out, having just started new employment. Not surprisingly, that wouldn't go over well to have 2 months immediately off for the length of this trial. So the court does find that Juror 676 has presented a reason to be excused for hardship. So thank you again for reporting today and filling out your questionnaire last week. You're excused with the same admonition I gave the previous jurors about any communications that you make or others want to make with you. And with that, you can be excused. Let's next talk to Juror 682.
Good morning. So I guess I didn't realize there was a part on the questionnaire that talked about finances. I was pretty nervous. I work as a surgical nurse, and this would be not only a hardship on me financially because I have debts to pay, but also on them because we're short-staffed. In fact, they asked me to come as soon as I could today after I'm done here, just because, you know, for patient safety, it's important to have an adequate staff, and it's been a real struggle to meet those needs at our surgical center. And I also have a small, we run a farm, and I have a small side business breeding horses. I have some debt related to that, and 8 weeks of no pay would be a hardship for me to not be in default with those debts, and my work does not give any compensation for jury duty.
Okay, I reviewed the questionnaire you've got as it relates to what you listed in your employment. So just to confirm, you did discuss with your employer the potential you'd be required to serve, and that's what they advised you about their policy for compensation?
I did ask her. Obviously, she knows I'm here because I'm not at work. She said she would get back to me on their policy. She didn't know what it was. But I've been a nurse for 30 years, and I've never worked for anybody that compensates so far. It would be unpaid time off.
All right, let me ask the state if they have any follow-up questions for this juror.
I think, Your Honor, just with the compensation, we didn't know, is it possible that you could ask your employer to determine whether or not you would be compensated for the time that you're serving on jury duty?
It's possible, yes.
I think that's the only question that the state had.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Blake. Mr. Archibald, any questioning from the defense?
Your Honor, we do not object to Juror 682 being excused for hardship based upon her job as a nurse and her part-time job with her horses.
All right, the court's considered the hardship request from Juror 682, and based on that information received, the court will grant the excusal for hardship for this particular juror based on the work situation and your financial obligations at this time. So Juror 682, you can be excused with the thanks of the court as well. Also, with that same admonishment I've given the other jurors about communications after your service today. Juror number 696.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I may not provide income for my family, but I take care of everything else. We do not put our children in daycare for their safety. So if I am here, my husband's at home not making money. Because he's not on the jury, I am.
Okay, you currently have 3 children at home, is that correct?
Yes, sir. I also take 3 additional children from the neighborhood to school as well.
All right, I saw the concerns you did raise in the questionnaire about those issues, and you thought at that time you filled out the questionnaire it may be a hardship if you were required to serve with that child care obligation. Let me ask the state if the state has any follow-up for Dyer for juror number 696.
Your Honor, I think she answered the additional question. The state's question, based on the questionnaire, had been whether or not her spouse was able to care for the children. We'd noted the comment that they do not allow daycare or others to watch their children. I think she has now answered that question, and given the response today, the state would have no objection to her being excused.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. Mr. Archibald from the defense.
Your Honor, we do not object to Juror 696 being excused for hardship.
All right, thank you. Juror 696, we did review that issue based on your responses when we went through the questionnaires, and with those follow-up questions, the court's in agreement that it would create a undue hardship for you to serve in this case given the length of time with your child care obligations, so you can be excused with the thanks of the court. I think we also had your 869, is that correct? 9? Okay. I may have made an error in my notes here on the numbers. Was there any other juror that raised an issue about hardship? Okay, thank you. The next topic we would generally discuss would be the knowledge of the case. Many of you have indicated some knowledge of this case in your questionnaires. At this point, instead of asking who that would be, let me just ask, is there anyone in the group here that did not indicate they have a previous knowledge of this case? You didn't know anything about the case until you came in for jury service, and that's the response in your questionnaire. So each of you has heard something or knows something about the case through media, is that correct? Okay, we'll talk to you all individually about that issue when we get to the end of your voir dire. I'll next ask you about the subject matter of this case. Would the subject matter of this case, which includes charges involving murder, conspiracy, and theft, make it impossible or difficult for you to fairly and objectively evaluate the evidence in this case and render a fair and impartial verdict? Okay, everyone answered no to that. I'll next go through a line of questions which you might think are or should be obvious from reading your questionnaires, but I'm required to read these to go through some Idaho law that would relate to challenges for cause. Are any of you related by blood or marriage to the defendant, or do you know her from any business or social relationship? Do any of you have any relationship of guardian and ward, master and servant, employer and employee, creditor and debtor, landlord and tenant, boarder or lodger between you and any of the attorneys in this case? Have any of you been a party in any civil litigation against the defendant, Ms. Vallow Daybell? Have any of you ever brought a criminal complaint against Ms. Vallow Daybell or been accused of a crime by any of the prosecutors involved in this case? I'll next ask if there's any relation between you and any of the attorneys or their firms. So in order to do that, I'll ask the state to indicate who you are and who you work for and what other attorneys are in your office. I don't know if you both want to take that up or one speaking for both. Ms. Blake, if you'll go through the office attorneys and introduce yourself again for the jurors.
I am Lindsay Blake with the Fremont County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. With my office, the other attorneys are Tanya Rawlings, Rocky Wixom, and Blake Hall. As you were already introduced, Rob Wood is the Madison County Prosecutor. Within his office are the attorneys Mackenzie Cole, Spencer Rammel, Adam Garvin, Troy Evans, and then as you've both been introduced, we have Ms. Smith here, who's been deputized in both Fremont and Madison County and is working as a deputy prosecutor for both counties.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. Mr. Archibald, would you please introduce yourself and the nature of your office?
I'm a sole practitioner.
All right, and Mr. Thomas, who do you work with?
Thank you. My name is John Thomas. The other attorneys that I work with are Jordan Crane, Jason Gustavus, Timothy French, Alex Sosa, Tyler Salveson, Brad Rigby, Paul Butikofer, and Justin Bowles.
All right, thank you, counsel. I'll note that these attorneys, with the exception of Ms. Smith, all generally practice or have practiced in eastern Idaho. So with those names in mind, then I'll ask the jury panel here, do any of you have an attorney-client relationship with any of the attorneys or with any of those other attorneys they work with? Are any of you related by blood or marriage to any of the lawyers, or do any of you have or know any of the lawyers from a professional, business, or social relationship? Yes, juror 631.
We do have an office in Idaho Falls and Pocatello, which is over in that area. I don't work in those offices. I work out of the administration office, but I am affiliated with Idaho Legal Aid. I just want to make sure that's not going to be issues.
Okay, I appreciate you providing that information. In the course of your employment, have you ever dealt personally with any of the attorneys who we just mentioned?
No, I have not.
All right. Have you been exposed at all in any way to this case through the course of your employment?
No, I have not.
Okay. Thank you for that follow-up. I'll next ask the question about prior jury service. Have any of you previously served on a jury? If you have, please, let's see, we have some yeses and nos. So if you have, raise your red card, please. Okay, juror 818 and 536. I'll talk to each of you briefly about that. So juror 536, how many times have you previously been on a jury?
Once.
And where was that?
It was here in Ada County.
How long ago?
15 years.
Okay. You must have been at least 18 then, I take it.
Barely,
okay.
But yeah.
Was it, if you recall, a civil or a criminal case?
I think it was criminal, but I'm not positive.
And did you actually sit through the trial and reach a verdict in the case?
Yes.
Was there anything about your experience of that jury service that would impact your ability to be an impartial juror in this case?
No, it was a really good service. It was a good experience.
Okay, thank you for those comments. I'll next ask the same questions. Juror 818. When was it you previously served?
13 years ago?
And was that one time prior? Once?
Yes.
And where were you in that?
San Diego County.
Okay. Do you recall if it was a criminal or civil case?
Criminal case?
And do you recall if a verdict was reached in the case?
Yes, we reached a verdict.
Okay. Was there anything about your experience serving in that case that would impact your ability to serve in this case?
No.
Okay. Thank you for that comment. I'll next ask a few more general legal questions here for you. Have any of you ever formed or expressed an unqualified opinion that the defendant, Ms. Vallow Daybell, is guilty or not guilty of the offenses charged in this case? Do any of you have any bias or prejudice either for or against the defendant in this case? Okay. The next issue would be regarding witnesses. In the questionnaire, there was a list of witnesses, and you each indicated whether or not you knew any of those witnesses. To the best of your knowledge, are your answers in the questionnaire still accurate as it relates to knowledge of witnesses?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anyone here who would be unwilling to follow my instructions to you as the jury as to the law that you must apply in determining this case? Do any of you have a religious or moral position that would make it impossible to sit in judgment of another or to render a fair and impartial verdict? Are there any of you that, if selected as a juror in this case, would be unwilling or unable to render a fair and impartial verdict based only on the evidence presented in this courtroom and the law as instructed by the court? All right, finally, kind of a catch-all question here. Do any of you have any other reason why you cannot give this case your undivided attention and render a fair and impartial verdict? Okay, with the jurors answering all of those questions at this point, then the court has concluded its section of voir dire. I'll let the state now conduct its voir dire of these jurors.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being here again today. I know you were all here last week as well, so we appreciate you hanging in there with us for this process. Just to clarify a few things with you, maybe a little confusing to hear that we have two elected prosecutors here from both Fremont and Madison County. If you recall from when the judge read the indictment, though, he talked about that these crimes were alleged to have taken place across both counties. We're both small offices, and so we've joined together in the joint prosecution of this matter. It's not often that you hear of two counties prosecuting together. So in case anyone was confused by that, we just want to clear that up. And then I want to talk to you a little bit and reemphasize, the judge has let you know this as well, but because we are trying to make sure that we select a jury that can be fair and impartial, if at any time there is something that you're uncomfortable with, you're asked a question that you don't want to talk about in front of everyone, there's information that you feel like we should have or that you should share with us, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and let us know that you'd rather talk one-on-one or individually. We recognize that that may be a concern for some people, and we'd rather than have you hold back or have concerns, we want to make that as comfortable as possible to make sure that we are selecting a jury that can be fair and impartial, because that is only fair to Ms. Vallow Daybell, the defendant here, as well as the state, to have everyone do that. And so one of the things that I want to ask about is brutal honesty and what that means. Juror 818. If I use the term brutal honesty, what does that mean to you, or what comes to mind?
I would say saying the entire truth and not holding something back for fear of future, ramifications.
Okay. And juror 646.
Being completely honest without holding anything back for fear of hurting the other person's feelings or thinking how it might make them feel.
Okay. So I think we heard very common things there. Would everyone agree that brutal honesty is just telling the truth how you see it, not holding back even if it might hurt someone else's feelings? And does everyone here feel that they could be brutally honest? And when you're discussing with other people, while we want everyone to listen to others, could you all commit to being brutally honest with your feelings and your thoughts? And I'll ask you all and give a little analogy here. If you got on a plane and instead of the pilot telling you, hey, we're going to arrive at the destination at such and such time, I'll get us there safe, sit back, enjoy the flight, if instead the pilot said to you, I might be able to land this plane, we might get there at this time, would anyone feel comfortable staying on that plane? Okay. And I'm going to ask juror 863. I think you answered no. Why would you not feel comfortable staying on that plane?
I would feel unsafe.
Okay. If the pilot, if you had the choice to get on one of two planes, and one the pilot said, I can land this plane, I know I can, and yet another one that said, well, I think I can land this plane, which one would you choose?
The first one?
The pilot that could land the plane?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll ask the same question to 869. And why would you not why would you not feel comfortable on that plane?
I wouldn't have confidence that the pilot knew what he was doing.
And if you were given the option of one that could for sure land the plane and one that might be able to, which one would you choose?
The pilot that can land the plane.
Okay. And I know that may seem like a silly question, but the reason that we ask that and the reason that I want you all thinking about that is we are going to ask you all to be the pilot in this case. You are going to be the ones that listen to evidence, you go back and consider it, and you make a decision. And sometimes people will say, I think I can be fair and impartial. I think I can follow the judge's instructions. And so that's what we want you thinking about. We need to know that the jurors can follow the instructions given by the judge. The judge may give some instructions that you may say, I don't agree with that. I think it should be this way. I think the law should say this. Can all of you commit that you would set any of that aside and just follow the instructions given by the judge?
Yes.
Does anyone have concerns about their ability to do that?
No.
Okay. Does anyone here believe that everything you hear in the news or read on the internet is 100% true? And I'm going to ask juror 401, why do you not believe everything that you see in the news or read on the internet is true?
Well, they're trying to sell it and make people watch it.
So do you feel that different sources may give different information?
Oh, yes.
And same question for 536. Do you feel that everything is true and accurate?
Not as far as the media goes, no.
And for the same reasons, or do you have other thoughts on why?
I think the same basic reasons. Everyone has a point of view, and often news agencies have agendas, and they want clicks. Like, we all know what clickbait is.
Okay. Thank you. And as the judge already talked about, we're going to talk a little bit more about publicity later. I just wanted to make sure that nobody would say that they absolutely believe everything that they read on the news or read on the internet. As the judge already talked about, and you've heard the indictment, the nature of this case is could be a touchy topic for some people. We are dealing with a case in which 2 children were murdered and a mother of 5. Knowing the nature of this case, that you are going to hear evidence related to those types of charges, does anyone have concerns about their ability to sit on this jury? And along those lines, some of the evidence that you may see in this case may not be the easiest to view, may be upsetting to some people. While it's normal to be upset by some things, does anyone here feel that looking at some evidence, maybe autopsy photos, maybe something else that you find upsetting, would that create a concern to anyone regarding your ability to sit on this jury? An 891, go to you. And can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, I was a witness of a very horrific accident in my childhood. When I see a graphics, it's affect my overall ability to make a proper judgment.
So, and I just want to follow up a little bit on that. So when you say it affects your ability to make a proper judgment, or would you be able to set those images or that evidence aside, or do you feel that it would influence your ability to be fair and impartial?
I could set those, my personal feeling aside to be fair, but it could impact my emotions and my ability to, in the long run, to maintain my emotional balance.
So, and of course, we expect those things to maybe be upsetting for people. Do you feel that that would be more than what would upset a normal or a regular person if you hadn't had those experiences in your childhood?
It's a very difficult to make a statement, but whenever I see some graphics, it's emotionally impact me. I cannot withstand that.
And I think you'd also indicated that you have a young child.
Yeah.
Do you feel that that would be difficult to see photos of children?
If the photos are graphics, then definitely it's, I cannot forecast what could be my emotional feeling at that time. But whenever I see a graphics, anything which is not normal, something is there's some kind of the blood in there that sometimes it impacts, and I just to be honest, when any kind of graphics I plays anywhere in news, it impacts my feeling and recall my childhood when I witnessed a very horrible accident to us.
And I appreciate your honesty, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot there, but that's exactly what we want to when we're talking to you today. We talk about brutal honesty with each other when you're allowed to speak about the evidence and go through these things, but we also mean brutal honesty here today. And so given that information and that position, do you, I guess actually the state would just move to strike Juror 891 for cause.
Okay, what's the response from the defense on the motion?
We do not object to Juror 891 being excused for hardship.
Okay, in this case, the court's reviewed the challenge as well as the questionnaire of Juror 891. The issue expounded on in voir dire questioning was also raised as a concern in the questionnaire, and further concerns that were raised in terms of possible hardship given the length of the trial. But with those responses and in anticipation of evidence that may be presented in this trial that may unfairly impact this potential juror or cause issues with their impartiality in the case, the court does find it's appropriate to sustain the challenge. So juror number 891, the court will allow you to be excused in this case, grant the state's challenge, and you can be dismissed.